In this section, I'm going to be using dry media, just color pencils. Crayons would work as well. The idea here is that you just layer colors to create your mixes because you're not going to be able to fluidly mix them the same way as you would with watercolors. So you just manually mix them by layering them on top of each other. Now this paper has a tooth to it, meaning it's not perfectly smooth, so it's not ideal necessarily for color pencils, but it'll accept them fine. You're just going to see that texture of the tooth of the paper some through it, which is fine. I'm not going to need yellow for the negative space, so I'm sticking with that monochromatic blue. I'm going to hold on to my magenta in case I want to, if I can take it like slightly to the blue violet, and still I think that can count as the monochromatic, but these will be my three that I mostly use. Now when I'm working with color pencil on this paper, I don't want to press super hard with my first color. When you press really, really hard with a color pencil or a crayon for that matter, it applies, of course, then a very heavy layer of that material onto your paper, and then it's not easy to mix and blend your colors because it's hard to layer a color on top of another color that you've pressed really hard with. So I'm just pressing lightly with this color and I'm filling in this area. I'm trying to stick as much as possible with coloring in the same direction so that it's smooth, and I'm always making sure that I'm fully filling in my area. I'm going to switch directions just to outline this shape because my strokes are starting to get a little wider and I'm having a little bit of a harder time controlling them not going into the space that I want to avoid. So I'm just going to, in this section, I think I just will color fairly hard with this color pencil just to get a different blue. Now I could leave this just like this. This would be fine. It creates a tint of blue because that white of the paper is showing through. But if I want to, I can come on with another color that works within my color scheme and I can start to layer it on top of my first color, and I'm not pressing super hard. I'm controlling the amount of color that goes on my paper with how much pressure I use to actually color. So by adding this black to this blue, I'm starting to create a nice shade of blue, and it does change some as it travels over the paper. It's not perfectly smooth, but that's okay because the paper itself isn't perfectly smooth. And I can just work through coloring all of my areas in my composition by layering these colors on top of each other. I'm going to come down here and show you mixing some purple in, and then I'm also going to show you mixing, or not purple, sorry, magenta in, and then I'm also going to show you mixing some white in. White can be kind of nice with color pencils because sometimes it doesn't necessarily change the color of the color pencil all that much, but what it can do is smooth it out some. So it won't smooth it perfectly on this textured paper, but it may give a little bit more smooth layer. So I'm just going to grab this magenta. I don't want it to turn all the way into purple, but I just want to add a little bit of this magenta into this section just to vary the blue a little bit. And then I'm going to come back on top again with my blue to bump up the blue color and take away a little bit of that magenta. So just layering them on top of each other. And then I'm going to come on top of that with my white, and I'm going to color fairly hard with this white on top of these other colors. I'm pressing down really hard, and you may notice it's not changing the color at all, but it is sort of smoothing it out some. So if I bring this all the way up to the camera, hopefully you can see that it's a little smoother over here than over here where I haven't added any white yet. It's just, the texture of my color is a little different in those two areas because of adding this white. The white just sort of blends the two other colors together. And now I've finished that section with the white, and it looks hopefully a little more smooth all over the whole thing. So I'm going to finish out coloring my negative space with my monochromatic blues and my color pencils. So I did find with the color pencils that like just using only one color of blue really wasn't giving me the variety of shade and tint and tone and just color in general that I wanted. So I did end up pulling a couple other blue color pencils out. Now, when the one note about color pencils is they do require patience if you want them to look nice. Like, you really have to pay attention to trying to color smoothly with them, by staying consistent with how you're coloring and by really fully filling in areas. And then they can look really nice and they can do some nice blending, but you have to be willing to show patience. One thing that I think is helpful is when you're working with a fairly sharp color pencil, it's of course a sharp point. It's going to give you a very thin line that can be hard to color areas in. But if you switch your grip and hold it like this so that you can more like lay the full point of your color pencil on your paper when you're coloring rather than the tip, you're laying like the full sharpened part onto your paper and color with it like that, you're going to get a larger bit of color that's going onto your paper, which will end up giving you a little bit more smooth layer of color. So rather than coloring on the tip, just sort of switching your grip, laying it down, and coloring with it more laying on its side. And you may find that that just gives you more control over the texture of your coloring. So if you're working with dry media, it is, nice to work with probably more than one of your color, and then even working in some of those actual like secondary colors with your media rather than, you can mix all of it, but you may need to work with some of that as well just to get the quality of work that you're aiming for. Now this one, of course, doesn't need to dry. I can move straight into my positive space. So for my positive space, I want to go with that analogous scheme of yellow to orange. So if I'm working with these two, I can do that I can, because I'm working with dry media, if I wanted to work with an orange color pencil as well to help me to give a little bit of assistance in getting the colors that I want, that would be fine. So I've added a layer of yellow to this leaf here, and I'm going to come lightly on top of it. I'm going to do that thing where I switch my grip because I don't want a bunch of magenta lines on that yellow. I really want to make it smooth, and I'm just adding that layer of magenta on here, trying to keep it as even, as smooth in my application as possible. And from far away, you can see that that looks orange. When I bring it up close, you can see the two individual colors, but what your eye will do is blend them together so that it creates a pretty okay orange by mixing those two colors together. If I start off with my magenta here and I color that color in and I work on top of that with my yellow, I'm going to get an entirely different orange just based on which color I started with first. I'm also using a heavier pressure with both of them here, but this is a little bit darker of an orange. If I come back again on top with that magenta, I can control what type of an orange. This is definitely turning into more of a red orange than my first example. So I'm going to work on filling in all of my positive space here using these. I can make shades. I can create a shade of orange by adding some black. I can color very lightly to create a tint, and then I think it is okay to go ahead and use some of those other color pencils as well, like the going ahead and having an orange one available to mix in. I'm going to try my best to avoid using the orange color pencil just as is and just leaving it, but I could mix some yellow with it to create a yellow orange. I can mix some magenta with it to create a red orange, just to force myself to do some color mixing. I'm finishing up with my color pencils in as many places as I could. I didn't just use one pencil, except some places I did just use the yellow pencil. But in a lot of places I pushed really hard to blend the colors together by just layering them on top of each other and fully filling in the spaces so that I've got a nice variety of yellow and orange throughout this composition.